The marketplace buzzed with life. The air was rich with the aroma of spices, and laughter mingled with the hum of bargaining voices. Yet, for Minna, the world seemed to stop. His heart thudded like a heavy drum in his chest. There, sitting on the dusty ground with sunken cheeks and shaking hands, was a sight he never thought he'd see. Kodo, his brother. The same brother who had betrayed him, who had sold him slave trade to the white. Minna's legs felt like stone. His breath caught in his throat. How could this be? The man who had destroyed his life now looked like he carried the weight of 1,000 storms. Minna rushed to strike him with his fist. How did it all begin? Let's take a moment to journey back in time and uncover the story. In a lush African village, surrounded by towering trees and thick green forests, two brothers were born to parents known far and wide for their honesty and kindness. The older brother, Minna, was like a shining star. His goodness lit up the village. He was loved by everyone for his hard work, kindness, and always being there to help others. The villagers looked up to him like a hero. But then there was Kodo, the younger brother. From the moment he could walk, chaos seemed to follow him like a shadow. He was wild, mischievous, and caused trouble everywhere he went. The villagers started calling him the Menace, a troublemaker whose actions were more dangerous than a raging storm. Kodo's evil deeds hit a new low when he tricked a small boy, no older than 5, into venturing to the dreaded Forbidden River. He did this because the father of the boy scolded him for beating up a boy about his age. This wasn't just any river. It was a cursed, haunted place, feared by everyone. The water was said to be filled with deadly crocodiles and venomous snakes, and the spirit of a vengeful warrior roamed its depths. The villagers stayed far away, knowing the gods demanded sacrifices to keep the river from bringing disaster. But Kodo, with a wicked grin and gleaming eyes full of mischief, promised the boy he would show him rare magical fruits hidden near the river. The boy, unaware of Kodo's cruelty, went towards the river, inching closer to certain doom. Just as the boy was about to step into the cursed water, fate took a turn. The king and the chief priest appeared to make some sacrifice to the wandering spirit just in time to rescue the child. They swiftly uncovered Kodo's evil plan, and the village was left in shock. At the palace, it was a scene of heartbreak. Kodo's parents wept as if their very hearts had been ripped out, and Minna, filled with rage and sorrow, nearly struck his brother down. The king, furious beyond measure at Kodo's wickedness, ordered a brutal punishment, 130 lashes, to show that no evil would be tolerated. But even after this terrifying punishment, Kodo showed no remorse. His heart was as cold as stone. He continued to steal from the hard-working villagers, ruin their festivals, and spread fear and chaos wherever he went. Kodo became a nightmare. The very mention of his name sent shivers down the spines of the villagers, and they began to wonder if he was cursed by the gods or simply born evil. Many years later, Minna and Kodo had grown to be a young man. Minna got married to the king's daughter, and they had 3 beautiful kids. Kodo, on the other hand, still was a shame to his family. Kodo's true colors shone even brighter one fateful dry season when hunger crept into the village like an unwelcome guest. Farmers guarded their harvest jealously, knowing it was their only lifeline until the next rains. Among them was Babatunde, an elderly man known for his wisdom and hard work. His barn was filled with yams, enough to feed his family and help a few neighbors through the hard times. One afternoon, Kodo approached Baba Tunde, pretending to be humble. "Baba," he began, feigning respect, "could you spare me a single tuber of yam? My belly hasn't known food in days." But Baba Tunde, knowing Kodo's reputation, shook his head sternly. "I cannot trust you, Kodo. My yams are for those who respect the land and its people." Kodo's face darkened with fury. "You'll regret this, old man," he spat before storming off. Later that night, when the village was cloaked in darkness and the only sounds were the cries of distant hyenas, Kodo crept to Baba Tunde's barn with a flaming torch in hand. His heart burned with rage as he whispered, "If you won't share, then no one will eat." He set the barn ablaze, the flames roaring like a lion in the wild. The fire devoured the yams in minutes, sending thick smoke spiraling into the starry sky. The villagers awoke to screams and the crackling of fire. They rushed to Baba Tunde's farm but arrived too late. The barn was reduced to ashes, and Baba Tunde sat in the rubble, weeping like a broken man. "Who could do such a thing?" he cried. It didn't take long for the villagers to suspect Kodo. His jealousy and malice were no secret. When confronted, Kodo smirked, his eyes gleaming with wicked delight. "Maybe the gods were angry with him," he said, shrugging as if the disaster were nothing. The villagers were furious. Even the elders, known for their calm wisdom, called for Kodo to be banished. But his parents begged for mercy, weeping and bowing before the king. Minna, ashamed and heartbroken, vowed to watch over Kodo, though his patience was wearing thin. The villagers, however, had reached their limit. "Kodo is a pest," they murmured. "One day his evil will destroy us all." Yet Kodo laughed in their faces, strutting through the village like a rooster in his pride, convinced he was untouchable. As the years went by, Kodo's deeds grew worse. He stole, lied, and caused pain wherever he went. Even his parents, who had once loved him deeply, had no choice but to disown him. "You're no son of ours," they said with heavy hearts. But Minna refused to turn his back on Kodo. No matter how much his brother hurt him, no matter how much hate Kodo showed, Minna stayed. He gave Kodo food, shared what little money he earned. He makes sacrifice, prayed to the gods every night for his brother to change. "He's my brother," Minna would whisper to himself. "I can't give up on him." One day, Minna couldn't hold back anymore. He sat Kodo down outside their small hut, the golden light of the setting sun casting long shadows over the ground. "Kodo?" Minna began, his voice shaking. "Why are you like this? You hurt everyone who loves you, but I won't stop loving you no matter what you do." Kodo sneered, his face hard like stone. "Love? What's love done for me? It's weak, just like you. Stop wasting your time on me. I'm never changing." Tears filled Minna's eyes, but he didn't look away. "I'm weak? Then let me be weak. But I believe there's still good in you, Kodo. You can change. You just have to try." Kodo laughed bitterly and stood up. "Keep your dreams to yourself, Minna. I don't need saving." Minna watched his brother walk away, the sound of his laughter echoing in the still air. Yet, in the silence that followed, Minna whispered, "You can push me away, Kodo, but I won't stop. I'll keep believing in you. I'll wait for the day you come back." Kodo didn't look back, but deep inside, something stirred. For a moment, his chest felt heavy. Minna's words stayed with him like an ember buried in ash, waiting to ignite. One fateful day, strangers with pale skin arrived in the village, carrying gifts that shimmered and sparkled, mirrors that reflected light, Colorful beads and fine fabrics dazzled the eyes of the villagers. The king, curious about their intentions, invited them into the palace, offering them food and hospitality. The villagers are surprised. They have never seen a human so white as this. The Europeans seized the opportunity of their ignorance to lie to them. They told them they are the god's white messenger sent to bring good luck to the village. The king warmly welcomed the visitors, providing them with food and even hosting a grand banquet in their honor. The villagers rejoiced, saying, "At last, the gods of this land have remembered us." The so-called god's white messenger revealed a mirror, leaving the king and his chiefs astonished. They exclaimed, "What kind of sorcery is this? I can see my face clearly in this object." This moment solidified the king's suspicion that these people were far from ordinary. The Europeans even claimed that the mirror brought good luck. But the Europeans had darkness in their hearts. They came not to bring good luck, but to take, to capture, and sell the villagers as slaves. To succeed, they needed someone who knew the land and was willing to betray his own people. It didn't take them long to find Kodo. Kodo, blinded by greed, struck a deal with the Europeans. In exchange for trinkets, especially a small shining mirror he adored, he agreed to help them. In his heart, he knew what he was doing was unforgivable, but he convinced himself it didn't matter. He began to scheme. Kodo approached Minna with a warm smile, a rare sight these days. "Minna," he said, "the strangers want to share their wisdom. Come with me. They asked for someone kind and hard-working like you." Minna, always trusting, nodded without hesitation. "If you say so, brother," he replied, his heart swelling with hope that perhaps Kodo was finally changing. But it was a trap. Deep in the forest, the strangers waited. As soon as Minna arrived, they ambushed him. Rough hands grabbed him, cold chains bound his wrists, and no matter how much he struggled, he couldn't break free. "Kodo!" Minna cried out, his voice breaking. "Help me!" But Kodo stood still, watching as his brother was dragged away. His face was emotionless, but inside his heart ached. He clutched the small mirror tightly in his hand, the weight of his betrayal pressing down on him. Back in the village, Kodo pretended to search for Minna, his voice loud with fake grief. Where could he have gone? He asked, joining the villagers in their search. For months, he kept up the act, convincing everyone of his innocence. But secrets have a way of revealing themselves. One day, a hunter found the small mirror in Kodo's hut, the very mirror he had received from the strangers. Whispers spread like wildfire, and soon the villagers confronted him. "Kodo!" they shouted. "What have you done? Where is Minna?" Kodo, realizing the truth could no longer be hidden, panicked. Without a word, he fled the village, leaving behind the only home he had ever known. His greed had cost him everything, his family, his brother, and his place among his people. Minna's life was torn apart the day his own brother Kodo betrayed him. The pain of the betrayal was sharper than any blade. Kodo had lured him into a trap, selling him to pale-skinned strangers for a sack of gold. Minna's trust shattered into pieces, and the love he once felt for his brother turned into a simmering hatred. Dragged from his homeland, Minna's journey into captivity was a nightmare. The strangers hauled him in chains to the coast. There, his eyes widened in horror as he saw endless rows of his people, bound and broken. The air was thick with despair, filled with the heart-wrenching cries of mothers, fathers, and children separated forever. Minna tried to fight back, but his captors struck him down, leaving him bruised and bloodied. For the first time, he realized the depth of Kodo's betrayal, a betrayal that had condemned him to this inhuman fate. When Minna was forced aboard the slave ship, the true extent of his suffering began. The vessel was a floating prison, crammed with bodies pressed so tightly together that it was impossible to move. The stench of sickness, waste, and death filled the air. The days blurred into nights, marked only by the groans of the dying and the thundering waves against the hull. Food and water were scarce, and Minna grew weaker with each passing day. But his hatred for Kodo fueled him. He refused to give up, clinging to the thought of seeing his homeland again. When the ship finally reached its destination, Minna was sold to a wealthy merchant who owned a sprawling plantation. The foreign land was like nothing he had ever seen, its skies strange, its buildings towering, and its people alien. The plantation was a hell of back-breaking labor where the sun beat down mercilessly and the overseer's whip struck without hesitation. Each lash felt like a burning reminder of Kodo's treachery. At night, Minna lay on the cold ground, his body aching and his spirit weary. But his hatred gave him purpose. He dreamed of returning to his homeland, of seeing his parents, his wife, and his children again. He longed to feel the warm earth of his village beneath his feet, to hear the familiar songs of his people. But he knew the road back was nearly impossible. As a black man in this foreign land, the borders of Europe were walls he could not easily scale. Years passed, and Minna's resilience set him apart. The plantation owner, Mr. Whitmore, noticed his quiet determination and calm demeanor. Unlike the overseers, Whitmore was a man of few words and strange kindness. He began to trust Minna, allowing him to learn the workings of the plantation. At first, Minna resisted, not wanting to help the man who benefited from his pain, but he realized that knowledge could be his key to freedom. Whitmore, a widower with no heirs, grew fond of Minna. Before his death, he made an unexpected decision to grant Minna his freedom and leave him a small part of his estate. For Minna, it was a bittersweet moment. Freedom had come at the cost of years of suffering, and it was a gift from a man who had once owned him. But it was a chance to reclaim his life. With Whitmore's inheritance, Minna began a modest trade business in the bustling markets. It was not easy. As a black man, he faced prejudice and suspicion at every turn. But Minna's sharp mind and honest dealings earned him respect over time. He traded fabrics, spices, and goods across the seas, slowly building his wealth. Despite his growing success, Minna's heart remained heavy. His mind often drifted to his homeland and the family he had left behind. He wondered if his parents were still alive, if his wife had remarried, if his children, if they still lived, would even recognize him. The longing to return burned within him, but the journey was fraught with peril. The borders of Europe were a fortress, and Minna knew that as a black man, his chances of crossing them were slim. Still, he prepared. Minna saved every coin he could spare, hoping to one day find a way back. In the meantime, he dedicated part of his wealth to helping others like him. He built schools for freed slaves, provided shelter for the homeless, and funded missions to reunite separated families. Each act of kindness was a small rebellion against the world that had tried to break him. Minna's hatred for Kodo never faded. He imagined confronting his brother, looking him in the eye, and demanding to know why he had betrayed him. But more than that, he longed to see his parents, to kneel before them and tell them he had survived. He wanted to feel their embrace, to tell them he had not forgotten where he came from. The path back to his homeland was uncertain, but Minna refused to give up. He had survived chains, storms, and whips. He had built a life from ashes, and though the road was long, he vowed to walk it step by step until he could once again call himself a son of his village. Years passed, and Minna's dream of returning home never left his heart. He had built a life of freedom and success in a foreign land, but it was never enough. His soul yearned for the red soil of his homeland, the sound of familiar voices, and the embrace of family. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the faces of his parents, his wife, and his children, their images growing fainter with each passing year. He promised himself he would see them again, no matter the cost. But crossing the border was no easy task. The roads were dangerous, filled with patrols that would seize anyone who looked like him. Minna spent months preparing for the journey, gathering false papers and saving every coin he could. He hired a smuggler, a shady man who promised to guide him through hidden paths. The journey was terrifying. Minna crouched in the back of a wagon filled with sacks of grain, holding his breath every time guards inspected the vehicle. His heart pounded as he passed through checkpoints, but luck, or fate, was on his side. After weeks of hiding, walking, and sneaking across treacherous terrain, Minna finally crossed the border. For the first time in decades, he was free to walk towards the land he once called home. Tears streamed down his face as he looked at the familiar hills and fields. The sight was bittersweet. He didn't know if his family was still alive or if they would welcome him after so many years. As he entered a bustling town near his village, Minna noticed a small crowd gathered on a dusty street corner. Curious, he pushed his way through. What he saw made his blood run cold. Kodo. There he was, his brother, the man who had sold him into slavery, now sitting on the ground in tattered clothes. Kodo's once proud frame was thin and frail, his face hollow and aged. He held out a trembling hand, begging passers-by for scraps of food. His voice was weak, his eyes filled with desperation. Rage boiled inside Minna. All the years of suffering, the endless nights of pain, and the memories of chains came flooding back. Without thinking, he stormed forward. "Kodo!" Minna roared, his voice thundering over the noise of the crowd. Kodo looked up, his eyes widening in shock. Before he could speak, Minna's fist collided with his face. The force of the punch sent Kodo sprawling onto the ground. Gasps erupted from the crowd as Minna grabbed Kodo by the collar, lifting him to his knees. "You sold me!" Minna shouted, his voice trembling with anger. "You betrayed me! You destroyed my life!" Kodo's lips quivered, tears streaming down his face. "Minna, please," he cried, his voice barely audible. "I was desperate. I was young and foolish. I didn't know they would take you away forever." Minna shook him violently, his fingers digging into Kodo's worn clothes. The crowd gathered closer, murmuring among themselves. Some tried to intervene, but the fire in Minna's eyes kept them at bay. "You didn't know?" Minna spat, his voice dripping with bitterness. "Do you know what I endured? Do you know the hell you sent me to?" Kodo fell to his knees, sobbing uncontrollably. "Please, brother, forgive me. I've regretted it every day of my life. I lost everything, our parents, our home. I've been cursed ever since I betrayed you." Minna stood there, his chest heaving, his fists clenched. For a long moment, he said nothing, staring at the broken man before him. The anger in his heart clashed with the memories of their childhood, of the times they had laughed and played together. Finally, Minna released his grip, letting Kodo slump to the ground. The crowd slowly dispersed, their curiosity satisfied. Minna took a deep breath, his hands trembling. "Get up," he said gruffly. Kodo looked up, his face streaked with tears. "What?" "Get up," Minna repeated. "You look like a ghost, and I'm not going to let you die here." Kodo struggled to his feet, his body weak from hunger. Minna put a firm hand on his shoulder and led him to a nearby inn. They sat at a small table, the warmth of the room contrasting sharply with the cold anger still lingering in Minna's heart. The innkeeper brought them food and drink, and Minna watched as Kodo devoured the meal like a starving animal. Silence hung between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the clatter of plates. When Kodo finally spoke, his voice was hoarse and filled with regret. "Minna," he began, his eyes fixed on the table, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. What I did to you was unforgivable. I've lived with that guilt every day. I've prayed for the chance to see you again, to tell you how sorry I am." Minna leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "You can't undo what you did," he said quietly. "You can't erase the years I spent in chains, but you're still my brother." Kodo looked up, his eyes brimming with hope. "Does that mean—" "It means," Minna said, his voice softening, "that I forgive you, not for your sake, but for mine. Hatred has been my companion for too long. It's time I let it go." Kodo broke down, sobbing into his hands. Minna reached across the table and placed a hand on his shoulder. The two brothers sat there, the weight of years of pain and regret slowly lifting. That night, they talked for hours, sharing stories of their lives and the hardships they had endured. For the first time in decades, they were no longer enemies, but brothers again. The journey had been long and filled with suffering, but in that small inn, under the flickering light of a lantern, Minna and Kodo found a chance to heal and start anew. After the emotional reunion at the inn, Minna turned to Kodo with a determined look. "We're going home, Kodo," he said firmly. Kodo's face fell, panic flashing in his eyes. "Home?" "Minna, I can't. Not after what I've done. They'll never forgive me." But Minna placed a hand on his brother's shoulder. "You've changed, Kodo, and our parents. They never stopped loving us. You deserve a second chance, even if you don't believe it yet." Reluctantly, Kodo agreed. Together, they journeyed back to their village. The roads were unfamiliar, the landscape different from the one they had left behind. When they arrived, Kodo barely recognized the place he had once called home. The once simple village had grown larger, with new homes and bustling activity. The brothers asked for directions to their old home, and a kind villager pointed the way. As they approached, their hearts raced. The house looked weathered but sturdy, a testament to the years that had passed. When their parents stepped out and saw them, time seemed to stand still. Their mother let out a cry of joy, rushing forward and pulling both sons into her arms. Their father followed close behind, his strong hands trembling as he embraced them. "My sons," their mother sobbed, tears streaming down her face. "You've come back to me." Their father, his voice thick with emotion, said, "It doesn't matter what has happened. You are our children. That's all that matters." News of their return spread quickly, and the villagers gathered at their home. Minna's wife, who had waited faithfully for years, came running. She threw her arms around Minna, tears of relief pouring down her cheeks. "I told them you would come back," she whispered, holding him tightly. Their children, now grown, stood before their father with wide eyes. Slowly they approached, and Minna embraced them, his heart full of joy and sorrow for the years he had missed. Kodo stood off to the side, overwhelmed by the outpouring of love. He felt like an intruder, undeserving of the forgiveness and warmth that surrounded him. That night, as the family prepared for a grand feast to celebrate their return, Kodo sat alone in his room, tears streaming down his face, the feast and the agony. The feast was a grand affair hosted by the king, who was Minna's father-in-law. The air was filled with music and laughter, and the villagers gave thanks to the gods for the safe return of the two brothers. But while everyone celebrated, Kodo was consumed by guilt. "This is not my place," he whispered to himself. "I don't deserve this. After all I've done, how can they love me?" In the privacy of his room, Kodo made a decision. He took a small vial of poison he had brought with him, knowing his guilt would never let him rest. "This is what I deserve," he muttered as he drank it. Pain coursed through his body, and he collapsed, tears streaming down his face as he whispered his final words. "I'm sorry. Minna." The grief of a family. As the feast went on, Minna noticed Kodo's absence. He searched the house with their parents, calling Kodo's name. When they entered his room, they found him lifeless on the floor, the empty vial clutched in his hand. A wail of anguish tore through the air as their mother fell to her knees beside her son. "Kodo!" she cried, shaking him. "Why? Why would you do this?" Minna knelt beside her, tears streaming down his face. He cradled Kodo's head in his arms, his voice breaking. "You didn't have to do this, brother. We forgave you. We loved you." The joyous celebration turned into mourning as the villagers learned what had happened. The music stopped and the laughter faded, replaced by the sound of grief. They buried Kodo beneath the old baobab tree near their home, a place where he had once played as a child. The villagers gathered to pay their respects, their hearts heavy with sorrow. Minna stood by the grave in tears, his hand resting on the simple stone marker. "You were more than your mistakes, Kodo," he said softly. "I only wish you could have seen that." Though the family mourned deeply, they vowed to remember Kodo not for his sins, but for the man he had tried to become. His death became a reminder of the power of forgiveness and the tragic weight of guilt left unspoken. And so, the village carried on, remembering the memory of the brothers' return and the bittersweet lessons left behind. This story has been told from parent to child for generations, carrying a simple but powerful lesson. Guilt is a heavy burden that can break a person, and betraying the people you love leads to sorrow. In the end, guilt always finds you, just as it found Kodo. Now, I share this story with you, hoping its message will stay in your heart and guide your choices.